Hi, I'm Mike, and I make all of the candles that you buy on this site. I'm going to do a video and show you how that's done. I'm going to make two varieties today. I'm going to make a mason jar candle, which will have a single wick, and I'm going to make one an apothecary jar, which is a little bit bigger. And so we're going to make that a 2-wick, and I'll show you how to do that. So the first thing you do is you want to put the wicks in and get your wax melting. First, I'll wick the mason jar. This is a single wick, and there's a couple different ways you can stick the wicks to the bottom. But basically, you're gonna try to get it centered, and you need something to stick it with. Now, a lot of wicks that you buy will come with stickers, double-sided stickers, and you just peel both sides, stick it on there, and you stick it down in there, and it sticks it to the bottom. Those work just great. I like to use a little bit stronger method so that when it gets hot down there, it won't release from the bottom of the jar, because as the candle burns, you're gonna get what's called a melt pool. And I have one burning here to show you. So melt pools should be about 1 inch, and that's about how much that is. And as this burns down, the bottom of that melt pool is gonna get down to where this wick is attached, and if it gets too hot, it can melt everything and kind of release the wick. So I have a hot glue gun here, and I find this sticks a lot better. And it's a little bit more forgiving when you stick it on the bottom, because you have a couple seconds to kind of adjust it if you need to, whereas the sticker you don't. If you don't stick it in the right spot, you gotta peel it off. So just go ahead and apply some hot glue, and then we're gonna stick it in the bottom. You can barely see, there's a little center. You can see where the center is. I don't know if that's showing up very well, but that's what I'm gonna go for. And like I said, the hot glue is gonna cool pretty quickly. So I have probably 5 seconds or so. All right, so this is gonna move kind of quickly. I always like to keep a popsicle stick so I can push down on the glue. There's your glue gun, glue stick. Just gonna put a nice amount on there. And then just kind of drop it down. Scoot it where I want it. Right in the middle. There you go. And in a few seconds, that will be dry. Now for the apothecary one, the 2-wick, that takes a little bit more effort. There's different ways to do this. I mean, you could just eyeball it 2 wicks apart, but you don't want to put them right next to each other, and you don't want to put it right next to the side. So one thing I'll show you is this. This is what the wick goes up into. So you set this on there, and once you get the wick stuck, that holds it while the melted wax cools. I'm sticking it to the bottom, so I like to just go ahead and trace a ring around the jar, which I've already done, and then I know that I want the wick there and there. So I'm just gonna center this as best I can. And then I'm just gonna put a little dot right in there. Just double checking it. Well, that looks perfect. Then what I can do is set my jar on there, and I can see the dots through there. And I'll just go ahead and take a marker. Gotta kind of get it down in there. And now I know where to set my wicks. Just gonna do the same thing. I like to try to straighten these a little bit, so then they go down a little better. There's one. And this board here that I have, it's just an old board that I coated in beeswax, because because beeswax has a really high melting point, so it'll keep it coated and I can do whatever I want on it. You can see there's burn marks and glue and all that stuff on there, and that's okay. Okay, there's the second. And there we go. And then if I just put this up through the holes, basically I'll slide it into that little slot so it's tight there and there. And then when I melt the wax, I pour it right in there, and then it holds it until it cools and hardens a little bit. And there it is, all set up, 2 wicks, ready to get poured into. Okay, so now we're gonna weigh the wax. We have to figure out how much goes in each one of these. A good rule of thumb when you buy wax is if you're getting like a flake wax, wax flakes, it's basically double the wax of what the container holds when the wax is not melted. So you would basically fill this up twice, and then once it all melts down, it'll be perfect. Now I've done this before, so I happen to know that this jar holds about a little over 6 ounces if I fill it almost to the top. Now I like to make a little extra, one so that I make sure that I have enough for the candle, but if I have any extra, I have silicone molds that I just pour off the excess, and it makes great wax melts. Now the type of wax you use is up to you. Soy candles are really popular. Soy has a great reputation for being a nice clean burn. It's a good burn, but 2 things. 1, it can sometimes have problems sticking to the jar, and 2, it does have what we call great scent throw, meaning it'll carry the scent out into the room really well, but paraffin does a little better job than that, but paraffin's not as clean burning. So I personally like to do a 90% soy with a 10% paraffin blend. So if I'm making 6 ounces of candle and 10% of that is paraffin, then I'm gonna do 0.6 of paraffin, 5.4 of soy wax, and that gives me my 6 ounces. I'm gonna go ahead and do 8 ounces because I'm gonna make wax melts. So I have a dedicated jar here that I use. I'm just watching the numbers go. Okay, so I'm gonna make about 8 ounces here. So 10% of that in paraffin would make 0.8. So it means I need 7.2 ounces of wax flakes, and that's what I have. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I just have some paraffin wax chunks here that I think work really well. That one's a little big. Let's try a little smaller. So we're gonna go with that. I'm gonna stick this in the oven and let it melt. Now, the thing about candles is that when you put the fragrance oil in these, the oils that you put in that smell good have to bind with the wax. And so you have to get the wax a certain temperature for it to bind. If the wax is too hot, it'll burn the fragrance oil off. If it's too cold, it won't bind properly. So we're gonna heat this to exactly 185 degrees. Now there's different ways to heat your wax. I like to do it in the oven. Some people use boilers, and that's great too. And then I just have a thermometer here, and I've actually upgraded to one that will send a signal to my phone when it hits 185. So just put that in there, and let's put it in the oven. Okay, I went ahead and weighed out the wax for the Apothecary double wick candle. Figured you didn't need to see that twice. Put my temperature probes in there, so it'll let me know when it's 185 degrees. All right, we're ready to weigh out our fragrance oil. This is a fun part because it smells good. The Apothecary jar, the 2 wick, I'm gonna make Fraser Fir. And so I have a dedicated jar again. I'm gonna zero that out and use my Fraser Fir scent. Now how much fragrance oil you put in, you should follow the manufacturer recommendations. This one says for candles, it's 3 to 10%, and you wanna see what smells best. I found that for the 2 I'm making today, the 10% is really good. So this is gonna be It's going to have about 9 ounces in it, so I'm going to go ahead and do 0.9 for 10%. Now, if you are not very good at pouring accurately, you can get a dropper. It's not a terribly exact science. All right, and then I'm going to make a campfire marshmallow for the single wick. And so we had a little over 6 ounces of wax, so I'm going to do 0.6 on the fragrance, because that would be 10%. Actually, I'm making a little more because I'm doing wax melts. I forgot. And there we go. Now those are ready to be added. We don't put those in until the wax is 185 degrees though. Okay, we're at 185. You can see it's all melted and ready. So I'm going to transfer it over. And since it's 185, we're going to go ahead and add our fragrance. All right, so this is the Fraser Fir. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that in there. We're going to make sure it's mixed really, really well. So I'm going to stir this for a little bit. Some people don't like to color their candles because they don't want the dye, but sometimes, like on Fraser Fir, I want to put just a hint of green in there. So I just put a few drops so it's light. Now this is candle dye. You don't want to use food coloring. You don't want to use any other kind of dye. You want to get what's made for candles. And I'm just going to drop just a few drops in there. And that's the color it'll be when the candle's melted. Now I'm not going to color the campfire marshmallow because marshmallow is white, and when this dries or cools, it'll be white. Now, once I'm done stirring this, we're gonna put the temperature probes back in, and what we wanna do, you'll see there's a little variance on how cool to let these get before you pour them. I personally have the best luck with 145 degrees. So I'll let this cool down to 145 degrees, and once I do, I'll pour. I'll see you then. I'm going to do a gentle pour because you want to reduce the chance of air bubbles. And there we are to the top. I've got a little extra, so I'm going to go ahead and make some wax melts. You can do that with your extra wax. It's better to always have a little too much in your candle than not enough. And that made 4 wax melts. And I'll go ahead and pour the Fraser Fir. And I have extra of that, so I'll make some Fraser Fir wax melts. And now we'll wait for these to cool and start to harden, and I'll show you the final step. All right, now these have cooled enough to where they're set up and the wick can hold itself up. So it's time to take the wick holders off. I usually just cut these above the wick holder. That way I don't have the wick too short when I'm working with it. Just pop these out, lift it out. And now we're almost done. We're just gonna do some finishing here. There's usually a little bit of air, especially with soy candles, that gets trapped around the wick. So I like to just kind of wiggle the wick around a little bit, get those air bubbles out. And actually this one doesn't really have too many. Really none at all. And same with this one. Sometimes you get lucky like that. Like I said before, a gentle pour is what you need. And then I like to just make sure the wick is straight up how it should be. And then take just a regular kitchen torch and smooth out the top. So I messed up the wax where I wiggled the wick around. Did this one. These torches aren't expensive at all. Just a regular kitchen one. and it's refillable with butane. All right, and then I'll let that kind of cool, and we should have a smooth top, and then I'll cut the wicks down. All right, the only thing we have left to do is cut the wicks and give it one last blast with the torch and put our label on. Now, I know some people like to use big labels on their jars so you can see their company, but I figure you'd rather see your candle than my label, so I always just use small ones so that you can still tell who it's from and what the scent is. And then you should always cut your wicks to about 1/4 of an inch. So that's what I'm gonna do here. And I have these scissors that get down in there, so you get a straight cut. All right, labels are on, wicks are cut. Give it one last blast to smooth the top out. And we'll let that cool and put the lids on. You want to let a newly made candle cure about a week. It'll burn and you'll smell it, but it'll be better if you wait. And then last thing is we made these great wax melts out of the extra wax. So these are ready to unmold. Just set them on some wax paper and let them sit a little while. And those will melt really nicely. And that is the end.